It's a clear and cold morning out at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, where a NASA and European astronaut and a Russian cosmonaut are aboard their Soyuz MS-03 spacecraft, 160 feet atop a Soyuz booster and ready to launch at 2:20 this afternoon Central Time, 2:20 a.m. local time in Baikonur. And again, this live view of the Soyuz rocket is on Site 1, the launch pad in Baikonur. A team of launch controllers watching over all systems aboard the rocket, which is now fully fueled and ready for launch. No issues have been tracked throughout the day, which began with fuel and oxidizer loading at about 9:20 a.m. Central or 9:20 p.m. in Baikonur and was completed about 2 hours later. Good afternoon, everyone from the International Space Station Flight Control Room. This is Mission Control Houston. Along with flight control teams around the world supporting the International Space Station program, here on Mission Control, a team watching over the Expedition 50 crew and station systems and preparing to support the increase from 3 to 6 crew members with the addition of NASA's Peggy Whitson, Russian cosmonaut Oleg Novitskiy, and European Space Agency astronaut Thomas Pesquet. These three are about to begin a 2-day flight to the International Space Station with docking scheduled this Saturday, November 19th at 4:01 p.m. Central Time. The Soyuz MS-03 will be docking with the Rassvet module, also known as MRM-1, which is a port that faces towards the nadir or the Earth-facing side of the Russian segment on the International Space Station. And they will join the current station residents on board, led by Expedition 50 Commander Shane Kimbrough of NASA. And he's on there with flight engineers Sergei Ryzhikov and Andrei Borisenko from Roscosmos. Those three are still just in their first month aboard the station, having just arrived back on October 21st. They're scheduled to return home aboard the Soyuz MS-02 spacecraft in late winter of next year. Here in Houston today, the team in Mission Control is going to be monitoring the launch and getting updates on the flight from their Russian counterparts. Today's flight director is Judd Freeling, and the Capcom for launch is Jessica Meir. And during the Soyuz's climb to orbit, tracking and telemetry downlink to ground stations along the flight path and is then routed to the Russian Mission Control Center just outside of Moscow. Right now, though, we are 47.5 minutes away from the launch of the Expedition 50 crew to the International Space Station. This mission, launching under the call sign Kazbek, taken from the name of one of the major mountains in the Caucasus chain in Georgia and North Ossetia. Kazbek was chosen by Soyuz Commander Oleg Novitskiy, and it's the same call sign he used on his previous mission aboard Soyuz TMA-06M to the space station with Expedition 33 4 years ago. The crew's mission patch is in a coat of arms shape, features flags from each of the crew members' home countries, along with the name of the Soyuz spacecraft and the Roscosmos logo. In 3 quadrants, 3 animals symbolize each of the crew members, while the 4th depicts the Soyuz spacecraft aiming towards the space station's docking target. The eagle is taken from the state seal of Iowa, the birth state of Peggy Whitson, the buffalo from Belarusia, representing Oleg Novitskiy's origins, and then the lion represents the Normandy origins of French astronaut Thomas Pesquet. And the talisman you may see hanging over the commander's seat during the ascent are 3 small handmade cosmonaut toys chosen by Soyuz Commander Oleg Novitskiy, who plans on presenting them to Whitson and Pesquet at the end of their mission. But for veteran NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson, sitting in the far right seat, she's making her 3rd trip into space today. Her first flight was more than 14 years ago, back aboard Shuttle Endeavour on mission STS-111, which brought her up to the space station for a 6-month mission as flight engineer of Expedition 5. She returned to Earth aboard Shuttle Endeavour with the crew of STS-113. Whitson then returned to the station aboard Soyuz TMA-11 5 years later in October of 2007, becoming the station's first female commander to take command of Expedition 16. This mission marked the first time a female took command of the station. This mission will mark the first time a female is taking command of the station a second time when the current commander Shane Kimbrough hands over the reins to Whitson to command Expedition 51 in early spring of next year. In our more than 377 combined days in space, Whitson's performed 6 spacewalks, totaling 39 hours and 46 minutes. Why don't we take this opportunity for a closer look at Peggy Whitson's background and her inspirations on becoming an astronaut.
I was born in Iowa and raised on a farm. My dad and mom grew cattle and hogs and corn and soybean. Their incredible work ethic, I think, is something that has contributed to my success. I think that can-do attitude, that we've got to make it work, let's figure it out, never give up kind of attitude has been very important. When I was 9 years old, I watched the first guys walk on the moon and made an impact on me. I was very impressed. My father had a dream to learn how to fly. I learned how to fly when I was 10, and so I got to go on my first airplane ride when I was 10. I think all these things together, contributed to this fact that I could be what I wanted to be, and I obviously had the support of my parents believing in me, even though at the time young girls weren't supposed to do those kinds of things. When I graduated from high school, it was the first year they picked female astronauts, and I think that was another key moment in my life. And I think that was when becoming an astronaut changed from being a dream and into a goal. When I dreamed of being an astronaut, I had no idea how difficult it would be or what the odds would be in order to actually get in. And I think that work ethic, that dedication, was things that in the end helped me be successful. I'm Peggy Whitson, astronaut, a member of the NASA village that makes space exploration possible.
That was a look at Peggy Whitson, who's going to spend about 3 months as a flight engineer of Expedition 50 before she transitions to commander of Expedition 51 with the departure of Shane Kimbrough, Sergei Ryzhikov, and Andrei Borisenko next year. Veteran Russian cosmonaut Oleg Novitskiy is making his second journey into space today for his second long-duration mission on the International Space Station. He'll be in the Soyuz center seat serving as Soyuz commander. And Oleg first flew into space in October 2012 aboard Soyuz TMA-06M, along with NASA astronaut Kevin Ford and Russian cosmonaut Evgeny Tarelkin. He spent 5 months aboard Space Station as flight engineer of Expeditions 33 and 34. This time he'll serve as a Space Station flight engineer of both Expeditions 50 and 51. And the third and final crew member, European Space Agency astronaut Thomas Pesquet, is going to be venturing into space for the first time today. He was an Airbus A320 pilot with more than 2,300 commercial airline flying hours to his credit and was selected from more than 8,000 applicants for the European Space Agency's astronaut training program in 2009. Pesquet holds a master's degree in spacecraft design and control and served as an engineer with Thales Alenia Space in Cannes, France, and at the French Space Agency, CNES, before being selected as an ESA astronaut. He's going to be sitting in the left seat today, serving as Soyuz Flight Engineer 1. But we are still on track for an on-time liftoff today, again at 2:20 p.m. Central Time, 2:20 a.m. Baikonur time. The launch vehicle's control systems have been prepared and all of the gyros activated at this point, and the service components being lowered and the clamshell gantry service towers retracted in preparation for liftoff. The Soyuz consisting of the MS-03 spacecraft inside of the protective shroud at the top and the 3-stage booster below. The spacecraft was mated to its booster and the 3 main stages joined together last Friday. Then the entire rocket was transported by rail car to the launch pad about 7 a.m. Baikonur time on Monday, and then hoisted eventually to its vertical position a short time later.
Hope you're enjoying the music.
Again, some video from earlier this week as the Soyuz made that slow crawl via rail car from the assembly building out to pad. Again, launching today from site number 1, the same pad that launched Yuri Gagarin into space over 50 years ago for the first human being to fly in space. The Soyuz spacecraft, with its 3 crew members aboard, sits high above the 3 stages of the Soyuz booster, which uses kerosene and liquid oxygen as the propellant. The first stage has 4 liquid engines strapped to the side of the core vehicle. Each of those will burn for about 1 minute 58 seconds before they drop away. And at that point, the rocket will be 30 miles high and downrange of over 73 miles, with a velocity of 3,937 miles per hour. At the time of ignition, the engines will fire for several seconds before the thrust is enough to overcome those stanchions holding the rocket in place, and the Soyuz will take off. And that takeoff time is timed to come right at about 2:20 p.m. Central Time today. Again, you can see those 4 strap-on boosters that fire with the core stage to comprise the entirety of the first stage. Those 4 strap-ons all liquid-fueled. The launch escape tower will jettison as one of the first major events, followed by those 4 strap-on boosters. The core engine of the first stage also serves as the second stage and continues to burn until 4 minutes 57 seconds into the flight. Altitude at that point will be over 103 miles, downrange of over 179. Then the third stage, which uses a hot fire technique, will ignite just before the separation of the second stage, helping to push it away, and will burn until 8 minutes 45 seconds into the flight. By the time that's finished, the Soyuz will be in its preliminary orbit of 143 by 118 statute miles. But for now, everything's still on track for that on-time liftoff today, 2:20 p.m. Central Time, 2:20 a.m. Baikonur time. During the climb to orbit, tracking and telemetry from Soyuz is downlinked to ground stations along the flight path and routed to the launch control bunker near the launch pad in Baikonur and over to the Russian Mission Control Center just outside of Moscow. This is a live view inside of that room. The flight's controlled from the bunker until shutdown of that third stage engine, again about 9 minutes post liftoff, where it's then transitioned to the Russian Flight Control Center. Seconds after the Soyuz reaches orbit, the vehicle's command and control system will activate. Stored computer commands will deploy navigation and communication antennas, and the solar arrays will be deployed to collect power for use by onboard batteries, all of that generating electricity for the Soyuz systems. The first antenna to be deployed will be the core's rendezvous and docking antenna, which is going to be used to provide automatic range and rate of closure information on the final approach by the Soyuz for its docking to the Rossviet module 2 days from now. Immediately upon reaching orbit, the crew will oversee the program activation sequence of a variety of systems just before the spacecraft passes out of the range of Russian ground stations. Some of those systems include the spacecraft's power supply system, its radio communications, and also the critical motion control system. Then 3.5 hours into today's flight, Soyuz will automatically execute the first of several orbital adjustment burns planned as the vehicle fine-tunes its path to the International Space Station. And today will actually mark the third flight of the new Soyuz Modernized Systems, or MS series of vehicles, thus the designation MS-03. Previous to launching NASA astronauts Jeff Williams and Kate Rubins on 2 separate flights, and both of those, as with this launch, included the 2-day rendezvous to test out all of the various upgraded systems on board the Soyuz capsule, the entire craft that we'll detail a little bit later in our broadcast today. But everything moving along smoothly. That launch scheduled to come at just over 36 minutes from now at 2:20 p.m. Central Time, 2:20 a.m. on the 18th over in Baikonur, where a lot of folks have gathered to watch. The temperatures hovering right around 14 degrees Fahrenheit, so a very cold day for liftoff there. But no weather conditions impeding the launch so far today. No conditions with the rocket being tracked and the crew members on board. And as you can see on the front screen of the Russian Mission Control Center, and hopefully we'll get feed up soon, some video from the cruise day earlier today. They were awakened at about 5:20 a.m. Central Time this morning, 5:20 p.m. local over in Baikonur, just about 9 hours prior to the launch, and then participating in all of the traditional pre-launch activities. Before they depart for the launch pad, the 3 crew members go through the long-standing tradition of autographing the doors in the Cosmonaut Hotel in Baikonur. All of the crews autographing each time they fly on those doors, the Cosmonaut Hotel where they stay for about 2 weeks prior to launch in quarantine. They also receive a blessing from a Russian Orthodox priest who just the day before also goes and blesses the rocket at its pad, and usually any reporters or photographers in attendance as well. But then at about 8:30 a.m. Central Time today, 8:30 in the evening in Baikonur, the crew departed the Cosmonaut Hotel and boarded a bus for the ride over to the integration and suit-up facility at Building 254 at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Traditionally walking out with a lot of any media in attendance, friends, family, and program guests as well, getting a chance to wave goodbye, boarding the bus for about the 30 to 45 minutes towards that suit-up and integration facility, which marks really the first critical event for getting ready to get onto the rocket today. But for Peggy Whitson and Oleg Novitskiy, this is something that they've done before, a first-time experience for ESA astronaut Thomas Pesquet, but all 3 able to get on board that bus and head over to the suit-up facility.
And please remember that at this time it is not allowed.
So the crew arrived at Building 254 at about 9:05 a.m. Central Time this morning, 9:05 p.m. over in Baikonur. Each of the crew members goes through some final medical exams and then gets suited up in their Sokol launch and entry suits. Those the kind of iconic white suits that you'll see each of the crew members strapped into their Soyuz still wearing, and they'll wear that for any of the dynamic events inside that Soyuz craft, including today's launch, and then during the landing events when they ultimately come home in about 5.5 months. But again, if you're just joining us, we're getting a glimpse at some of the video from this morning's pre-launch activities there on the front screen in the Russian Mission Control Center. Once we get the feeds fixed up, we'll be able to bring it to our broadcast as well. But at this point, watching video from the crew members when they were out at the suit-up and integration facility, also known as Building 254, Each of the crew members, Peggy, Whitson, Oleg, Novitskiy, and Thomas Pesquet, taking turns and getting suited up, being helped by the suit-up professionals there just after going through their final medical exams. A fairly involved process to get in and out of these suits, but once that suit-up activity is completed, they were then to move to another room where they do pressure checks, just checking the seals and essentially the integrity of these spacesuits that they're going to be wearing for all of today's ascent events. And there you can make out again moving into that next room where the crew will take turns going one by one and sitting down into essentially a replica seat of what they are in right now inside the Soyuz. For those that don't know, each of the Soyuz seats molded specifically to the crew members. They actually, as part of their training, get these seat liners made specifically for them where they'll lay down or sit in these Soyuz seats and have the mold poured around them and made specifically for them in these suits just to ensure that they're in there as snugly as possible. But for now, they were one by one getting in this suit or the seat replica and having their suits pressurized. All of those activities beginning at about 9:50 a.m. Central Time, 9:50 p.m. in Baikonur, which is about 5 hours prior to launch, just to ensure the integrity of all of the seals inside of their Soka launch and entry suit. Following that, though, as you can see, there were also other people in the room on the other side of a protective pane of glass as the crews are essentially kept in quarantine, aside from necessary medical and support personnel, but they get the chance to speak to various officials, both from their home agencies, so Roscosmos, NASA, and the European Space Agency, as well as any friends and family there in attendance. And getting some reports from our colleagues out there in Baikonur that the room had a good amount of people in there to speak with them, including NASA Administrator Charles Bolden, who was up close and was joined by his STS-60 crewmate Sergei Krikalev, a former Russian cosmonaut and current head of the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center. Bolden sharing words with Peggy Whitson, one of NASA's most veteran astronauts. Also in the room were Dave Parker, the European Space Agency's Director of Human Spaceflight, the head of Roscosmos, Igor Komarov, and then the Deputy Roscosmos head, Alexander Ivanov, and Yuri Lonchakov, the Director of the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center. But then following all of those leak checks and then the backup crew also in the room to help the crew members out, you can see they went up to this pane of glass, and this is the last chance for them to really talk to their friends and family before they head out to the launch pad. Also a moment for them to relax a little bit while their fellow crew members are going through these leak checks.
We're going to mute the music a little bit now for a moment. How do you read me? We read you loud and clear. At 23:29:01 we have separation contact. And then there will be a compass until 2300 approximately. And you can start working per page 37 right now.
Важная информация заключается в следующем. Дело в том, что у нас будет очень короткая зона голосовой связи.
And unfortunately our voice AOS will be very short this time.
Да, это за 8 минут до конца сеанса связи. Будет возможность выйти к вам на связь у оператора НИПа.
And we'll be able to obtain the compass schedule from our ground station operators at about 23:35.
And for those still following along, you can see on the screen they left the suit up and integration facility waving farewell. The crew members actually getting a little bit of extra thermal insulation with some special suits that they wore just for the trip out to the launch pad, as again it was hovering around 14 degrees Fahrenheit, but departing building 254 and getting a final sign-off from the Russian State Commission before boarding buses and then heading out to the launch pad one more time, waving farewell to all those in attendance. They boarded the bus at about 11:20 a.m. Central Time, 11:20 p.m. over in Baikonur. The drive takes about 25 minutes, arriving at the pad at 11:45 a.m. Central, 11:45 p.m. in Baikonur. As is tradition, the crew helped from the bus over to the rocket by various members of their home agencies.
Peggy, this is Baikonur launch lead. So Главный is going to talk to you after separation contact. So you will have 3 minutes to talk. And at 23:40, please check for page 39 if you have everything. Repeat, please. Yes, at 23:40. At 23:35.
And there we get that feed restored there. You can see just in time to see the crew members waving at the pad one final time before getting on the elevator and riding to the top of the Soyuz to board their capsule. Again, you can see a little bit more clearly now wearing some a little bit extra insulation, these jumpsuits over their Sokol launch and entry suits. This done every once in a while when the crew is facing some especially cold conditions, as temperatures are right around 14 degrees Fahrenheit over there in Baikonur right now. Again, into the elevator, riding to the top of the Soyuz rocket, boarding the capsule. All three have been on board for just about 2 hours now. The Soyuz rocket, as you can see, billowing oxygen, was fueled about 3 hours prior to the launch.
Baikonur launch lead, if you have any questions. Please let us know if you have any questions. And just continue working for procedure. Are you getting the telemetry? We are going to be following the TV and video. Compasses.
And right now we're back with a live view of the rocket on the pad there, currently 18.5 minutes away from launch, still targeted at 2:20 p.m. Central Time, 2:20 a.m. in the morning over in Baikonur. Again, the crew's been on board for about 2 hours already, going through suit leak checks and a number of other things. The emergency escape system also armed on board the Soyuz. That's the small pinnacle you can see at the top, which would fire in the event of a problem during launch. Systems designed to pull the spacecraft and crew clear of the booster, enabling the capsule to then parachute to a safe landing in the event of an emergency during the launch or the early stages of the climb to orbit. At the time of today's launch, the space station will be flying at an altitude of about 251 statute miles over the South Atlantic, just east of Argentina. The two-day 34-orbit rendezvous will culminate with docking to the International Space Station's Rassvet module this Saturday, November 19th at 4:01 p.m. Central Time, 5:01 p.m. Eastern, while the station flies over the Atlantic off the west coast of Africa. Atop the rocket and within the Soyuz MS-03, again, are Peggy, Whitson, Novitskiy, and Thomas Pesquet, now just 16 minutes, 48 seconds and counting away from launch. The whole spacecraft is 23.5 feet long and weighs in at 15,496 pounds and is comprised of 3 different modules. The descent module, situated in the middle of the Soyuz vehicle, contains those customized seats that I talked about earlier for each of the crew members during launch, entry, and landing, and contains all of the controls and displays necessary for the flight. It also contains life support systems, batteries for the re-entry and landing, and the parachutes and soft landing rocket engines to slow the Soyuz just before touchdown when it lands in Kazakhstan. There are 8 hydrogen peroxide thrusters located on the module that are used to control the spacecraft's orientation or its attitude during the descent until those parachutes deploy. Also has a guidance and navigation and control system to maneuver the vehicle during the descent phase of the mission. And the descent module in all weighs in at 6,393 pounds with a habitable volume of 141 cubic feet, so a bit of a tight squeeze for 3 people. Approximately 110 pounds of payload can be returned to Earth in the module. And then the descent module, an important fact, the only portion of the Soyuz that survives the return to Earth. Up through the hatch, you go into the orbital module, which on top connects to the descent module via a pressurized hatch. It's where the crew has a small amount of room to move around during the flight to the station. Has a volume of 230 cubic feet with a docking mechanism, hatch, and rendezvous antennas located at the front end. Docking mechanism used to dock with the space station, and the hatch allows entry into the orbiting complex. Rendezvous antennas are used by the automated docking system known as CORS, which uses radar to maneuver towards the station for docking. There's also a forward-looking window in the module that the crew can use to take manual measurements of distance and closing speed with a laser rangefinder in the event of a failure of that rendezvous system. And so with this 2-day rendezvous, the orbital module providing a little bit of extra room for these 3 crew members. And the third and final, the orbital module, or the propulsion module, houses the oxygen storage tanks, the main engine, the attitude control thrusters, avionics, and communications and control equipment. The propulsion portion of this module handles all of the orbital maneuvers, including those needed for the rendezvous with the space station and the deorbit burn at the end of the spacecraft's mission. And before they are deployed, the two solar arrays folded against the body of the prop module, which separates from the descent module after the deorbit burn, along with the orbital module. The solar panels span almost 35 feet. And the entire spacecraft serving not only as a crew transport vehicle to and from station, but also an emergency return vehicle in the event that the crew should have to leave the station unexpectedly. NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson's been in training for more than 2 years for her third space flight and long-duration space station mission. A little while ago, NASA Public Affairs Officer Haley Fick had a chance to talk with her when she was in her final stages of training in Russia about the 2-day Soyuz journey, planned scientific research aboard the station, and what she's looking forward to during her 6-month stay.
Thank you for joining us, Peggy. You're about to embark on a 2-day journey to the International Space Station. Can you take us inside that cozy ride and let us know how you're going to stay comfortable with your crew and any operational activities you'll have to carry out?
Well, it definitely is a very cozy ride. There's not a lot of space for us. About 1 day's worth of time. We aren't doing too many activities. The first day, obviously, with launch and the initial maneuvers is pretty busy. And then the last day, as we do the rendezvous and docking, we're also very busy. But the day in between tends to be a little bit boring, at least it was on my last flight. So Thomas has promised that he's working on his magic tricks and jokes.
That'll be great. So this is going to be incredibly, it's going to be your third trip to the International Space Station. Can you let us know if there's anything different that you're expecting this time around and what you're looking forward to about this third trip?
Well, obviously the station structure has changed since I flew 8 years ago. We've now added 2 new additional scientific modules, another module that contains the new life support hardware. We have another module for stowage, another test module, the beam, and obviously my favorite that I'm most looking forward to is the cupola, which will give us a fantastic view of the Earth from there. I'm anticipating that's going to be a very great view. So I'm looking forward to obviously just seeing those changes that have occurred, but also looking forward to conducting the scientific research and performing the program, the NASA program, and getting as much accomplished as possible in the next 5.5 months or so.
And there's a lot more capacity for science up there now, as you mentioned, and it all started for you as a scientist here at NASA. Are there any certain experiments that you're really looking forward to on this mission?
I think I have a personal interest in some of the experiments looking at immune function in the human body and how that changes, stem cell research. I think it could be very interesting as well. But mostly I like the hands-on experiments because it involves more interaction, and to me that has always been the more satisfying type of experiments. So those I find a little more challenging to do and more interesting.
So this time around, you're accompanied not only by a cosmonaut, but a French crewmate. And coincidentally, on your last mission, you were also accompanied by a French astronaut. Can you tell us a little bit about how that international dynamic really helps enrich the work being done on Space Station?
Well, I think the international part of what we do with the International Space Station is actually pretty much the stepping stones for how we will do future exploration. So it's very important for us to understand and how to work with other cultures, because it's not like we're just doing something political. It's that we're trying to accomplish something that is technically very complicated, and we need to have a much greater understanding of how we do business together and what those limitations might be from different cultural perspectives. So I think our work together here is definitely going to be a precursor for future space exploration. I think we'll be exploring as a planet as opposed to as a country, just because exploration is so very expensive. And obviously I think that the exploration is worth doing because it takes us to the next level in development of technologies. And I think it's part of us, philosophically speaking, I think it's who we are, and I think exploration is what we will end up doing.
Lastly, we've really been enjoying your NASA Village content on your social media accounts, where you take the chance to highlight the people here on the ground who do all that work to make it possible. I know launch day is very busy, but do you ever have a chance to stop and think about all those people that you work with here on the ground when you're getting ready to launch?
I absolutely do. And I think actually every day on station, there'll be something where you're like, wow, that trainer was really right on when they described this or told me that. Or this flight controller really did a fantastic job developing this particular procedure. So you never forget that all those folks there have contributed and are helping you. And I think it happens every day.
Back now with the live view of that Soyuz rocket still on the pad there in Baikonur, just 8 minutes, 10 seconds away from liftoff, scheduled at 2:20 p.m. Central Time today. The vehicle gyros and onboard flight data recorders have been activated, and the pre-launch preparations are nearly complete. While we get a quick listen in of the music being piped into the Soyuz, a group of NASA representatives are out there in Baikonur, just a short distance away from the launch pad. For an update, why don't we go over to NASA Public Affairs Officer Rob Navius.
Dan, it doesn't get much colder than it is right now here at the Cosmodrome. You just can't have enough layers of clothing. But with temperatures in the teens, spirits are warm nonetheless as we await the launch of this multinational crew. NASA Administrator Charlie Bolden is here, having traveled halfway around the world to attend today's launch. A few hours ago, he wished Peggy Whitson Godspeed and a safe voyage in the Cosmodrome's integration facility. Bolden travels back to Moscow after launch and will view the docking of this crew to the station in the wee hours Sunday. And the European Space Agency is represented by an all-star cast of former French astronauts and French government officials who are here to see Thomas Pesquet begin his mission. This morning's launch wraps up a remarkable 4-week period in which 2 Soyuz crew launches have sandwiched around a Soyuz crew landing, an impressive feat by anyone's yardstick. So with everything in readiness for launch in sub-freezing temperatures, that's it from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, Dan. Now back to you at Mission Control in Houston.
All ready for launch.
And that again, NASA Public Affairs Officer Rob Navius. Rob, thanks as always for the input from over there in Baikonur. As you heard, pretty cold for the onlookers, just about a mile away from the launch pad, ready to watch the Soyuz light up the night sky there. It's just a little after 2 in the morning there on the other side of the planet from us here in Houston, but we're under 6 minutes away from launch. At this point in the countdown, the first and the second stage engines ready. Telemetry being received from the rocket indicating the primary and the backup systems are ready. Shortly we should hear that the launch key has been inserted in the launch bunker. Yes, they do use a real key, transitioning the launch sequence into its automatic mode. And then things will begin to pick up very quickly here over the next couple of minutes as we march towards this on-time liftoff just 5 minutes, 10 seconds from now.
Aeros is nominal.
As we come up on 4.5 minutes away from launch, getting the view inside of the Soyuz capsule, you can see Oleg Novitskiy there in the center seat. At the top of the screen, European astronaut Thomas Pesquet making his first flight into space. Pesquet is actually going to be the 226th individual to visit the International Space Station.
Nominal.
And at this point, we're under 4 minutes. Onboard systems being switched to onboard control, and the commander's cockpit displays and controls all activated. You saw the crew members already have their helmets closed, putting them on suit oxygen. You heard the combustion chamber being purged, so all of the fuel lines and other elements of the rocket being purged with nitrogen. This done to help fireproof them by removing any excess vapors of fuel or oxidizer. Under 3.5 minutes from launch.
We confirm onboard measurement system is activated by run 2 command. Confirm oxidize and fuel, drain and safety valves of launch vehicles are closed.
Getting a quick thumbs up there from Soyuz Commander Oleg Novitskiy. Under 3 minutes and counting now until liftoff. Next up, we'll wait for the call that the booster tanks are being pressurized.
Booster propellant tank pressurization initiated.
Now you hear the call, the booster tanks being pressurized for flight. This helping to optimize the flow of that fuel and help adding some structural support to the rocket itself. Again, the Soyuz running off of liquid oxygen and RP-1, also known, it's essentially rocket fuel. It's a highly refined form of kerosene, delivering the thrust to the first stage, the core stage, and those 4 liquid strap-on boosters. 2 minutes and counting away from launch. You'll see in Novitskiy's hand the small poker tool, if you will, that being used to reach the various buttons on the command panel as the crew member strapped in very tightly for the ride uphill. 1 minute, 30 seconds away from launch. And 1 minute and counting. You'll see 2 different arms, possibly only one because the other looks like it's behind the rocket, but the first arm, the first umbilical tower will separate at about T-minus 35. Vehicle now on internal power. We have auto sequence start. That first umbilical tower separating from the booster. There's one more to go that will separate shortly. Under 30 seconds.
Auto sequence initiated.
We have auto sequence start.
Oxygen.
The engine's igniting. The launch command issued. Again, the engines will fire, ramping up towards flight speed.
Engines at maximum speed.
And liftoff. Peggy, Whitson, Oleg Novitskiy, and Thomas Pesquet rocketing towards the International Space Station.
10 seconds. Everything's nominal.
The rocket lighting up the night sky there in Baikonur. All initial performance calls indicate everything nominal or normal. First stage delivering 930,000 pounds of thrust through those 4 boosters in the single core engine. First stage, measuring 68 feet in length and 24 feet in diameter, is going to burn liquid fuel for the first 2 minutes and 6 seconds of the flight.
We copy.
Everything continuing to look steady, straight as an arrow for the Soyuz as it continues to rocket off. Again, launched right on time at 2:20 p.m. Central, 3:20 p.m. Eastern.
Everything's fine on board. Spherical tank pressure is nominal. We copy.
Over 70 seconds, 1 minute, 10 seconds into the flight, velocity of the Soyuz now over 1,100 miles per hour.
80 seconds into flight. Control and motion control systems are working nominally. Everything's fine on board. We copy. Thrusters of the second stage are working nominally.
All performance calls with the booster continuing to look great. Soyuz continuing to fly straight and true. And there you see the 4 strap-ons breaking away in the night sky there. The first stage boosters being jettisoned.
Copy.
Their job complete. They drop away at an altitude of about 28 statute miles. The Soyuz traveling at over 3,300 miles per hour. Now powered by the second stage.
Structure and the engines are nominal. The crew is feeling fine. We copy. We see you guys and we confirm.
Есть строй головного обтекателя. Есть управление спуск.
Steering, jettisoning, confirmed. Copy.
And so at this point, the launch shroud has been jettisoned. The Soyuz now exposed to the air and soon to space. The rocket at an altitude about 48 miles high.
See you on the second video camera and the descent.
In a wave there from NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson making her third journey to the International Space Station.
Hear you 5x5. Copy.
Seated just next to Russian cosmonaut Novitskiy. At this point, the Soyuz traveling at a speed of about 4,700 miles an hour.
The crew is feeling fine. We copy.
So the second stage continuing to burn, that core stage that also flies during the first stage, performing as expected. That core stage, 56 feet in length, 13.5 feet in diameter, has a single engine with 4 fuel chambers and is providing between 178,000 and 222,000 pounds of thrust, depending on the altitude, for its 3 minutes and 28 seconds of operation. It will continue to burn until the 4-minute, 43-second mark, to when the Soyuz uses what's known as a hot stage technique, and that's the third stage will ignite while the second's still burning. This is why the Soyuz has that small open grating area between the second and the third stages. So the second stage performing flawlessly so far. We are 4 minutes and 30 seconds since launch. Everything looking good so far.
We confirm third stage engine activation. We copy.
And getting confirmation the second stage has dropped away, separated at an altitude of about 105 miles. Soyuz now being propelled by the single engine of the third stage, providing 67,000 pounds of thrust, going to burn for the next 4 minutes and 2 seconds.
Is nominal.
And again, this is the third and final stage. It's going to continue burning until about 8 minutes and 45 seconds since liftoff, at which point the Soyuz will separate and be in its preliminary orbit.
Seconds into flight. All motion control systems are nominal. Everything's fine on board. Bobby.
Another look inside the capsule. Again, Oleg Novitskiy in the center seat, Thomas Pesquet, the European astronaut, at the top of your screen. This Pesquet's first flight, the second Soyuz ride uphill for Oleg Novitskiy. Everything continuing to go smoothly with the launch, which rocketed off on time at 2:20 p.m. Central Time. 6 minutes, 30 seconds since liftoff.
For 20 seconds. Roll, pitch, and yaw are all nominal. Everything's fine on board. And we hear you 5x5 and we see you on the video camera.
So over 7.5 minutes of flight. At this point, the Soyuz traveling at a velocity of almost 13,500 miles an hour. So there's just a little under a minute left in powered flight. Once the third stage delivers the Soyuz to orbit and the modules separated, those pre-programmed commands will be executed, preparing the Soyuz for orbital operations. All of these allowing the Soyuz systems to be automatically activated by onboard computers at precise times stored inside. And some of those maneuvers will include deploying, again, those critical navigation antennas and the solar arrays that will power batteries providing electricity to the various Soyuz systems.
20 seconds till contact separation. Affirmative.
And seeing the telltale jolt there, that means the third stage has cut off and separated.
Separation constant. Contact.
The confirmation coming from the folks in Mission Control Moscow. Third stage has separated successfully. That single liquid-fueled engine shutting down and dropping it away at an altitude of about 125 statute miles. And already getting confirmation from the visiting vehicle officer here in Houston. All of the different communication and navigation antennas have deployed along with those two solar arrays. So we have confirmation of spacecraft separation, deployment. The Soyuz now orbiting at an altitude of about 143 by 118 miles. And that orbit's going to be raised systematically over the next 2 days as they chase down the International Space Station. Control of the spacecraft from here on out will be overseen by the Russian Mission Control Center just outside of Moscow. But for now, safely in orbit, NASA's Peggy, Whitson, ESA's Thomas Pesquet, and Roscosmos's Oleg Novitskiy, following a successful and a flawless launch in the early morning sky over Baikonur. So everything going very well with this Soyuz MS-03 vehicle so far. Vehicle in orbit, all of the antennas and the solar arrays deployed, and the chase down of the International Space Station has now begun.
R-17 command has been sent. Yes.
And 3.5 hours into today's flight, Soyuz is going to automatically execute the first of 3 planned orbital adjustment burns as they fine-tune their path to the International Space Station. And then during the next 2 days, they will have 2 opportunities to test some of the systems on board the MS. This is the 3rd time the vehicle's flown, and the 3rd round of tests during a 2-day rendezvous. After the orbital insertion, previous versions of the Soyuz traditionally maneuvered using to its desired orbital attitude by using infrared sensors that actually look for the Earth's horizon. Right now, this view that you're seeing actually getting telemetry down from the Soyuz spacecraft. The advanced computer and the software of the new Soyuz MS series, now powerful enough to remember the last known valid altitude measured at the point of main engine cutoff, and is going to be able to calculate the current attitude by using gyros and accelerometers to measure how the spacecraft has moved since then. Technique is going to be tested by the Soyuz onboard systems by maneuvering the vehicle to a desired attitude more quickly without using that horizon sensor, and then verifying how well it worked. The new Soyuz also includes a redesigned combined propulsion system to provide additional redundancy, and then to gain just some more data on the effectiveness of the new thruster configuration. The spacecraft will perform a maneuver using only a small subset of the thrusters on the mid-ring between the descent module and the instrumentation propulsion module. Crew members and ground controllers are going to monitor both of these tests. And then additionally, a new tracking station near the eastern Russian town of Uglogorsk, close to the new launch complex called Vostochny, will be used for S-band telemetry and commanding, the same band that we use for commanding on the International Space Station, to test the ground station and the network. And then if all goes well, future Soyuz missions may be able to revert back to that 4-orbit single-day rendezvous with the space station instead of the 2-day one that Peggy, Whitson, and her crewmates are on right now.
Becky, we do not read you.
Becky, как слушать?
Becky, how do you read us?
Becky, тут Москвы, как слышно?
Becky, this is Moscow. How do you read us?
Becky, тут Москвы, как слышно?
Becky, this is Moscow. How do you read us?
Becky, тут Москвы, как слышно?
Becky, this is Moscow. How do you read us?
Я Казбек-1, слышу вас
This is Казбек-1.
Принимайте
I
меня.
read you loud and clear.
Хорошо, Казбек.
How
Еще раз
me?
повторите, с 24-го
Same here. Repeat, please, starting from parameter 24.
24-го параметра.
It's 17.7. 25 is 17.8.
And so with that successful launch, we're moving into the end of our launch commentary for today. Just a couple of notes for you for events coming up. Just following this broadcast, we'll be bringing you replays of the launch. We'll also be bringing you interviews from the viewing stand out there in Baikonur. And then we're also going to re-roll the package of pre-launch video from the crews making their way to the launch pad that we had some issues with during the broadcast. So be sure to stick around after this broadcast for those replays, interviews, and the re-roll of that package. And then at 5 p.m. Central Time, we'll do the NASA TV post-launch video file, as is tradition. And then coming up on Saturday, when the Soyuz arrives, we'll be bringing you live coverage on NASA TV, starting at 3:15 p.m. Central with our docking coverage. Docking scheduled to come at 4:01 p.m. Again to the Rosviet module. We'll then break away while they do all of the leak checks and get ready to open the hatches. Coming back on the air with our hatch opening coverage at 5:45 p.m. Central. The hatch is scheduled to open at 6:35, at which point the crew members will go on board, be greeted by the current Expedition 50 crew, and then get a chance to talk to friends and family back down on the ground. Then we'll have our final NASA TV post-docking video file at 8:30 p.m. Central. Just to recap, a successful launch today. 3 new crew members now in space on their way to the International Space Station. Peggy, Whitson, Oleg Novitskiy, and Thomas Pesquet in the Soyuz MS-03. They launched successfully on time at 2:20 p.m. Central, 3:20 p.m. Eastern, 2:20 a.m. Baikonur time. A flawless 9-minute ride into orbit. Their Soyuz craft operating soundly and on its way towards the International Space Station. That'll do it for us. Be sure to stick around for those launch replays and all of the other video, and then tune back in on Saturday as we get ready to welcome 3 new crew members to the International Space Station. For now, though, we will go ahead and sign off. This is Mission Control Houston.
There will be automatic.